Chapter 1. Introduction to Prayer. The concept of prayer in spiritual life. The importance of the next steps with God. In a small village nestled beside a gentle river, there lived a girl named Lynn. She grew up in a simple family where evenings were filled with laughter around the dinner table, though there were also days clouded by life's hardships. From a young age, Lynn had heard her grandmother talk about prayer as a sacred act, like an invisible thread connecting people to God. Her grandmother often said, "Prayer isn't just words, my dear, it's the breath of the soul." But back then, to Lynn, prayer was merely a string of familiar verses recited quickly before bed, a habit without much meaning. Then one day, a sudden storm swept through the village, tearing away their thatched roof and flooding the last of the season's rice fields. Lynn felt as though her world had crumbled. Her parents scrambled to salvage what they could, while Lynn sat huddled in a corner, her heart heavy with despair. In that moment of hopelessness, her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, "When you don't know what to do, pray." With nothing left to lose, Lynn closed her eyes and whispered, "God, I don't know if you're listening, but I need you right now." Strangely, though the storm still raged outside, a quiet peace began to fill her heart. She didn't understand why, but for the first time, she sensed that prayer was more than empty words. It was a doorway opening to something deeper within her soul. From that day, Lynn embarked on a journey to discover the meaning of prayer in her spiritual life. Prayer, as Lynn came to realize, wasn't a tool for demanding or pleading. It was like a conversation with a close friend, where she could pour out her worries, fears, and even her small joys. Through those days, she learned that prayer didn't just help her overcome difficulties, it drew her closer to God, a presence she believed was always listening, even if she couldn't see Him with her eyes. But the most important lesson Lynn uncovered was the value of walking forward with God after each prayer. Not every problem was solved instantly, like magic. The storm passed, but her family still had to rebuild their home from scratch. Yet through prayer, Lynn found the strength to face each day alongside her parents. Prayer, she discovered, wasn't just the moment she knelt to speak with God, it was how she lived, trusted, and acted under His guidance. This first chapter of Lynn's spiritual journey taught her a profound truth. Prayer isn't an end point, but the beginning of a deep relationship with God. And in the chapters of life ahead, she knew there was still much more to learn about its wondrous power. Chapter 2. Common Misunderstandings. Popular misconceptions about prayer. Their impact on mood and faith. After the storm, Lynn's life slowly returned to its rhythm, though scars remained: the slanted roof, the waterlogged fields. Prayer had become an essential part of her days. Each night, she sat by the window, gazing at the starry sky, whispering to God about little things: the joy of her father fixing the door, the sadness of missing her grandmother. But not every moment felt as clear as that first prayer in the storm. One afternoon, as Lynn passed by the market, she overheard the neighbors talking. "Prayer? It's just self-comfort," one said with a mocking tone. "I prayed so many times, and nothing changes. Maybe God doesn't care." Those words pierced Lynn like a dagger. She began to wonder, have I misunderstood prayer? Is it just an illusion I'm clinging to? The first misconception Lynn stumbled upon was the belief that prayer should always bring immediate results, like a miracle. She remembered praying for the storm to stop, but it came anyway. She'd begged for the rice not to die, but it drowned. In those moments, she'd silently blamed God, thinking He wasn't listening. Her faith wavered, and her mood grew heavy. She locked herself in negative thoughts. Maybe I'm not good enough for God to hear me. Then one day, while cleaning her grandmother's old attic, Lynn found a worn notebook. Inside were her grandmother's scribbled words. Prayer isn't about changing God's will, it's about letting Him change your heart. Lynn read it over and over, her heart lighting up. She realized she'd misunderstood prayer. She'd treated it like a transaction, expecting God to fulfill her requests instantly. But it wasn't like that. Prayer wasn't a magic wand. It was a journey of trust and waiting. Another misconception Lynn had fallen into was the idea that prayer had to be perfect, with eloquent words or a solemn tone. Once, she'd felt embarrassed for only managing a simple, "God, I'm so tired. Please help me." She worried those words weren't proper enough to reach God. But then she recalled her simplest moments, like that whisper in the storm, and realized God didn't need fancy phrases. He heard her heart, not just her words. These misconceptions had once held Lynn back. Some days, she didn't dare pray, fearing she wasn't worthy or that God was too busy for her trivial concerns. Her mood swung between hope and despair. Her faith felt like a flickering flame, easily snuffed out by misguided thoughts. But thanks to her grandmother's notebook, Lynn began to see that these misunderstandings didn't just distance her from God, they built walls that blocked the peace prayer could bring. This second chapter of Lynn's journey ended with a vital lesson. For prayer to truly become a strength in her spiritual life, she had to let go of those misconceptions. She started to view prayer as an honest conversation, free of pressure or demands. And with that, she felt a renewed faith, stronger than before, ready to carry her forward. Chapter 3: How Jesus Teaches About Prayer. Jesus' Teachings on Prayer. The difference between prayer as a ritual and as a relationship. Time passed, and Lynn grew to see prayer not just as a habit, but as something indispensable to her life. Yet she often wondered, am I praying the right way? The old misconceptions had faded, but she longed to understand prayer's deeper meaning. One evening, as moonlight streamed through her window, Lynn opened her grandmother's old Bible, the last gift left to her. She turned to the pages about Jesus' teachings, and from there, a new door opened in her spiritual journey. Lynn read how Jesus taught his disciples to pray in Matthew 6:5-13. He told them, "When you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others." Lynn paused to reflect. She remembered times she'd seen people pray loudly in public, their words flowing like a speech. She'd once thought prayer had to be like that, impressive, flawless. But Jesus continued, "Go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father, who is unseen." Those words touched Lynn like a cool breeze. Prayer, it turned out, wasn't a performance, it was a private, heartfelt moment between her and God. Then Lynn came to the Lord's Prayer, the model Jesus gave. She murmured, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name." The words were simple, yet they held a strange power. She realized Jesus wasn't teaching her to pray for a long list of personal wants, but to put God first, seeking His will above her own needs. This was far different from the hurried prayers she'd once offered, focused only on what she desired. One day, sitting by the river, Lynn pondered the difference between prayer as a ritual and as a relationship, a distinction Jesus' teachings revealed. Before, she'd prayed like it was a routine, reciting memorized verses each night without much thought, like checking off a task. But now, she understood that Jesus wanted her to see prayer as a conversation with someone close. He didn't need empty phrases or showiness, he wanted her heart. To test this, Lynn closed her eyes and said, "God, today I thank you because the river still flows, even after the storm. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I trust you're here." No long verses, no perfect structure, just words from her heart. And oddly, she felt a connection deeper than ever. Prayer stopped being something she had to do. It became a living relationship where she could share everything, from joy to fear, with the one she believed was always listening. But Lynn also learned that this relationship required patience and trust. In Luke 11:9, Jesus said, "Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened." She'd once thought this meant every request would be answered instantly. But reading further, she saw it as an invitation to persist, to not give up, and to trust that God would respond in His way, in His time, a stark contrast to mechanical prayers expecting quick results without deeper meaning. This third chapter of Lynn's journey ended with a major shift in how she viewed prayer. Through Jesus' teachings, she saw that prayer wasn't a dry ritual, but a vibrant thread linking her to God, a relationship alive with honesty and love. From here, she resolved to move forward, praying not just with words, but with her whole heart. Chapter 4. Prayer as a Relationship. Why prayer is about relationship more than words. How to build a deeper connection with God through prayer. As Lynn's relationship with God grew through prayer, she began to see it not as a distant idea or a duty, but as a living part of her daily life, like the steady breath she took each day. Yet she wondered, how can prayer truly become a relationship, not just words spoken into the air? That question launched her into a new journey, one of building a deeper bond with God. One early morning, as dawn broke over the river, Lynn sat on the grassy bank, her grandmother's old Bible in hand. She didn't read right away. Instead, she closed her eyes and whispered, "God, I'm here. I don't know what to say, but I want to be near you." No specific requests, no list of needs, just a simple desire to be with God. For the first time, she felt that prayer wasn't about finding the right words, but about opening her heart. It was like sitting with a dear friend sometimes. No words were needed, just being together was enough. Lynn began to understand why prayer was about relationship more than words. She recalled times she'd struggled to find eloquent phrases, thinking they'd make God notice her more. But then she realized God didn't care about polished speech, He looked at her heart. In John 4:23, Jesus said, "The Father seeks those who worship Him in spirit and in truth." To Lynn, this meant prayer wasn't about perfect sentences, but about sincerity from the depths of her soul. To build a deeper connection with God, Lynn decided to change how she prayed. Instead of just speaking, she started making time to listen. One evening, as the village settled into stillness, she sat beneath the big banyan tree and whispered, "God, what do you want to say to me today?" She didn't hear a clear voice, but in that silence, a thought came, "Trust in me." It wasn't something she heard with her ears, but felt in her heart, a small gift from God, reminding her that this relationship went both ways. She spoke to Him, and He responded in His own way. Lynn also learned to share everything with God, the way she used to tell her grandmother about her days. Once, while helping her mother carry water, she murmured, "God, I'm tired today, but I'm happy because Mom smiled more." Another time, when she was sad because her little cat fell ill, she said, "God, I know you care about small things, please look after it." These prayers weren't long or formal, but they brought her closer to God. She felt He wasn't just a distant figure in heaven, but a companion in every moment of her life. Building this relationship wasn't always easy, though. Some days, Lynn got caught up in farm work and forgot to make time for God. On those days, she felt an emptiness, as if an invisible thread had loosened. She realized that, like any relationship, her bond with God needed daily nurturing through patience, faithfulness, and love. This fourth chapter of Lynn's journey ended with a major discovery. Prayer wasn't a tool to get something, it was a path into a living relationship with God. she learned that when she opened her heart and trusted, even the simplest prayers could become a strong thread connecting her to Him. From here, Lynn resolved to pray not just with her lips, but with her whole life. Chapter 5, Rest and Understanding, the Importance of Listening in Prayer. How God hears the quiet whispers of the soul. As Lynn's relationship with God deepened, she realized prayer wasn't just about her speaking, it was also about listening. Before, she'd rushed through her requests, afraid that if she didn't speak quickly, God wouldn't hear. But now, she felt a gentle invitation from within: slow down and listen. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Lynn decided to try this. She sat by the river, where the water flowed softly like a wordless song. Closing her eyes, she took a deep breath and whispered, "God, today I'm not asking for anything. I just want to hear you." At first, she heard only the breeze rustling the leaves and the water lapping the shore. But then, in that stillness, a strange peace filled her heart. No audible words, no booming voice, just the sense of God's presence, like a friend sitting beside her, understanding her without needing to speak. Lynn began to grasp the importance of listening in prayer. She thought back to times she'd talked endlessly, from thanks to complaints, leaving no space for God to reply. But now, she saw that prayer wasn't a one-way speech, it was a two-way conversation. In Psalm 46:10, she read, "Be still, and know that I am God." Those words were a gentle reminder that sometimes, to understand God, she needed to stop talking and start listening. Listening didn't come easily to Lynn. Some days, her mind buzzed with worries: unfinished farm work, her parents' health. She'd sit to pray, but her thoughts galloped like a wild horse. She'd get frustrated, thinking, "Why can't I focus?" But she learned to forgive herself. She started small, deep breaths, letting her cares drift away like the river's current, focusing on God's presence. Slowly, she realized stillness wasn't something she created, it was something she received from Him. Even more wondrous, Lynn discovered that God heard the quiet whispers of her soul, things she never spoke aloud. One night, lying in bed, her heart heavy with missing her grandmother, she didn't pray. She just thought silently, "I hope she's okay, God." No words escaped her lips, but the next morning, she woke from a warm dream, her grandmother smiling by the river, as she had in life. Lynn wasn't sure if it was God's answer, but she felt a deep comfort, as if He'd heard her heart's silent cry. From then on, Lynn made listening a vital part of her prayers. Once, worried about the next harvest, she sat and asked, "God, what should I do?" In the stillness, a gentle thought came, "Do your best, and leave the rest to me." It wasn't a grand command, but a fatherly nudge, giving her strength to carry on, not with anxiety, but with trust. This 5th chapter of Lynn's journey ended with a precious lesson. Prayer wasn't just speaking, it was listening, both to God and letting Him hear her soul's quiet whispers. She found that when she rested and opened her heart, her relationship with God grew clearer than ever. From here, Lynn resolved to carve out moments of stillness each day, not just to speak, but to understand Him more deeply. Chapter 6, Prayer as the First Response, Why Prayer Should Be the First Response in Every Situation. Examples of prayer in daily life. As Lynn grew accustomed to listening in prayer, she realized her relationship with God wasn't confined to quiet moments by the river or under the moon. It could weave into every corner of her life, from peaceful days to chaotic ones. But a new thought struck her: why not make prayer my first response in every situation? That idea sparked like a light, and she decided to try changing how she faced life. One morning, while helping her mother cook, Lynn heard her father coughing outside. The sound wasn't new, but this time it lingered, tightening her chest with worry. Before, her first reaction would have been panic rushing for medicine or asking her mother if he needed a doctor. But this time, she paused for a second, closed her eyes, and whispered in her heart, "God, please take care of Dad." Just a brief plea, but it brought a strange calm. She still fetched the medicine, but without the old frenzy. She'd entrusted it to God first. Lynn began to see why prayer should be her first response. Life always threw challenges her way, big and small, and her instinct was to tackle them alone. But when she put prayer first, she felt she wasn't alone, as if God stepped into each moment with her. In Philippians 4:6, she read, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." It was a reminder that prayer wasn't just about asking for help, it was about trusting God before anything else. Prayer as her first response soon wove naturally into Lynn's daily life. Once, while carrying rice home, a sudden downpour began. The load weighed heavy on her shoulders, and she knew if it got wet, they'd lose precious food. Instead of panicking or running, she stopped under a tree and whispered, "God, please help me through this rain." Minutes later, the rain eased just enough for her to get home safely. She wasn't sure if it was a miracle or chance, but she knew her prayer had kept her steady and trusting. Even in joyful moments, Lynn learned to pray first. One day, when her mother finished sewing a new shirt from old fabric, Lynn cheered in delight. But instead of just praising her mother, she closed her eyes and said, "God, thank you for Mom's clever hands." That prayer wasn't just gratitude, it was her way of inviting God into her happiness. She realized prayer wasn't only for hard times, it was for sharing every moment, big or small, with Him. Of course, it wasn't always easy. Once, when her little cat fell gravely ill, Lynn forgot to pray. She ran around the village seeking help, her heart pounding, until she collapsed in tears by the porch. Only then did she remember and cry out, "God, I'm sorry I forgot you. Please help my cat." Miraculously, the cat recovered, but Lynn knew the greater lesson was how she'd let fear overshadow faith. From then on, she vowed to make prayer her instinct, not her last resort. This 6th chapter of Lynn's journey ended with a big shift. She learned to make prayer her first response in every situation, from worry to joy, crisis to calm. Through small daily examples, she found that putting God first didn't just bring strength, it brought His companionship in every step. From here, Lynn resolved to live a life where prayer wasn't just an action, but the heartbeat of her soul. Chapter 7, Praying with Faith and Soul, How to Pray with Faith and Submission. The benefits of sincere prayer. As prayer became Lynn's first response, she felt her life anchored in a greater strength. But she also noticed that not every prayer brought the outcome she hoped for. She'd prayed for her cat to heal, and it did. Yet she'd also prayed for rain to stop to save the rice fields, and it poured anyway. Those moments made her wonder, how do I pray with real faith, even when things don't go my way? That question led her into a new chapter of her spiritual journey. One evening, as the village darkened after a long day, Lynn sat by the oil lamp with her Bible. She turned to Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. The words shone like a light in her mind. She realized praying with faith wasn't about believing God would always do what she wanted, it was about trusting He had a good plan, even when she couldn't see it. Lynn began learning to pray with submission, not resignation, but absolute trust in God. One day, when her father's cough worsened, she knelt and said, "God, I ask you to heal Dad. But if your will is different, give me strength to accept it. Those words weren't easy deep down. She still wanted him well right away. But as she spoke them, a burden lifted. She entrusted her father to God, and whatever happened, she believed he wouldn't abandon her family. This way of praying required Lynn to put faith above her feelings. Once, when her mother lost a cherished keepsake ring, Lynn prayed, "God, please help Mom find it." Days passed, and the ring stayed lost. Instead of despair, Lynn closed her eyes and added, "Even if we don't find it, I thank you that Mom's still here with me." That submission didn't weaken her, it made her stronger, teaching her to hope in God, not just in what she wanted. The benefits of praying sincerely with faith and submission slowly unfolded in Lynn's life. First, she found deep peace. When she prayed not just to ask, but to surrender, her heart stopped wrestling with worry or disappointment. Even as her father coughed, she could smile and care for him gently, trusting God was with them. Second, sincere prayer helped Lynn live with gratitude. One morning, seeing new rice shoots sprouting after heavy rain, she whispered, "God, thank you that life goes on." She stopped viewing life through losses, instead seeing it through the light of what remained: her family, her home, and her unshakable faith. Finally, praying with faith and soul opened a deeper connection with God. Once, sitting under the banyan tree in silent prayer, Lynn felt a warm presence, as if he said, "I'm here, you don't need to fear." No grand miracle happened, but that certainty was enough to carry her through any trial. This 7th chapter of Lynn's journey ended with a profound lesson. Praying with faith and submission wasn't just an act, it was a way of life. She realized that when she offered God her heartfelt prayers, she didn't just receive answers, she received Him. From here, Lynn resolved to let every prayer be a breath of faith, a full surrender to the one she believed always loved and guided her. Chapter 8. Encouragement and Practice. Encouraging readers to practice prayer. Exercises and tips to enhance prayer skills. Lynn's journey with prayer had become an inseparable part of her life. From desperate days in the storm to peaceful moments by the river, she'd learned that prayer wasn't just an action, it was a way of living, a relationship with God that grew deeper each day. But Lynn knew she wasn't alone on this path. She wanted to share what she'd experienced, like a gentle call. Try praying, not just once, but every day, you'll see wonders unfold in your heart. Lynn often thought that if she could talk to someone about prayer, she'd start with a simple encouragement: don't be afraid that you don't know how to pray. God doesn't need you to be perfect, He just needs you to be real. She remembered her early days, fumbling through a few words in the storm, and how that fumbling opened a new door. She wanted people to know prayer wasn't a skill to memorize, it was a gift anyone could receive, if they were willing to open their heart. To help herself and others practice prayer, Lynn created small exercises she used daily. She thought if someone wanted to start, they could try these. Spend 5 minutes in silence each day. One morning, Lynn sat by the window, saying nothing, just breathing and thinking of God. She found that silence prepared her heart for deeper prayer. She'd say, "Find a quiet corner, even for a few minutes, and let your heart settle." You don't have to speak right away, just be there with God. Write a short prayer. Once, when her emotions were tangled, Lynn grabbed the scrap of paper and wrote, "God, I'm tired, but I trust you're here." Writing helped her sort her thoughts and feel closer to what she wanted to say. She'd encourage, if you don't know what to say, write it down. One sentence is enough. Pray in small moments. Lynn often prayed while working, carrying water, weeding fields. Once, she whispered, "God, give me strength to finish this load." She felt lighter, not just physically, but in her soul. She'd suggest, bring God into your daily tasks. He's not far away. Give thanks before asking, before requesting anything. Lynn began with gratitude. One day, worried about the harvest, she said, God, thank you that the soil's still fertile now. I ask for just enough rain. She found gratitude paved the way for faith. She'd advise, start with what you're thankful for. It'll change how you pray. But Lynn knew prayer wasn't always easy. Some days, she was busy or exhausted, tempted to sleep without talking to God. In those moments, she'd tell herself, just one sentence, Lynn. And she'd whisper, God, I'm tired, but I know you're here. She'd tell others, don't beat yourself up if you forget or miss a day. God's not angry. He's always waiting for you to return. One of Lynn's biggest tips was patience. She recalled prayers that didn't get instant answers, like her father's cough or the flooded fields. But over time, she saw God was always working, in His way. She'd say, don't give up if you don't see results. Prayer's a seed. It needs time to grow. This final chapter of Lynn's journey wasn't an end, but an invitation. Sitting by the river, watching its endless flow, she smiled. She knew prayer had changed her from a fearful girl in a storm to someone living with faith and hope. She whispered, God, thank you for this journey. Help others find you through prayer too. And to you, she'd say, start today. No matter how small, every prayer is a step closer to God.